Hi, again, I'm Janet Kelly, and it is my honor to present Dr. Kyle Foster, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education. Dr. Foster serves as the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the OSRHE. Dr. Foster oversees areas related to academic policy, development, and compliance, K through 12 student preparation, and state authorization. Before coming to the state regents, he worked in academic advising and undergraduate admissions. I will turn the session over to Dr. Foster.
Thank you, Janet, and good afternoon, everyone. I am so happy to be joining you, and I'm really happy to see that over 50 people have hung on a Friday afternoon. So thank you so much for sticking with it today, and I hope that I make it worth your while. So let me go ahead and see if I can get my slideshow shared. Okay. So I can't see video anymore because I have my PowerPoint up. Could someone verbally let me know if you can see the PowerPoint okay?
You are good to go.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so I know we have about 50 minutes, so I will move through this pretty quickly. I always end up taking more time than I thought that I would, so I don't want to go over time. I know that you all have other business to take care of this afternoon. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So I'm going to talk to you today about about updates on state regents operations, go through the changes that have been adopted by the state regents since the last time that I met with you, I believe in March. I'm going to talk to you about state regents policies that are currently under consideration, and then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. I have all of your questions that you submitted beforehand, and time permitting, I would also be happy to answer any questions that are submitted as we go along. And again, I can't see the chat because my screen is shared. If anybody wants to put questions in the chat, just to make sure that we get through the information, I'll answer those at the end as well.
Yes, and I'll be happy to facilitate that for you.
Thank you, Janet. Okay, so to start with, a few operations updates from our office. As I'm sure everyone has heard, Allison Garrett has been named our Chancellor-elect. She will assume office on Monday, November 8th. So Chancellor Johnson's last day officially will be Sunday the 7th, but his last day here in the office will be that Friday the 5th. President Garrett is currently the president of Emporia State University in Kansas. Before that, she was the executive vice president of Abilene Christian University. She was a senior VP of academic affairs here in Oklahoma at Oklahoma Christian University. And she started her career in higher education as a professor of law at Faulkner University in Alabama. And before her teaching career, she was an attorney in private practice, as well as for the federal government and in corporate law. So she worked for the Securities and Exchange Commission, and she also spent some time working for Walmart at their corporate headquarters in Arkansas. So we're very excited to welcome Chancellor Garrett on November 8th. That's pretty much all of the information that I have. I got to meet her briefly on the day that her selection was announced. As you can imagine, she was had a lot going on that day, and that was kind of at the end of a whirlwind tour of our office and the Capitol, and meeting with the governor and some others. So I don't know, that that she will remember a lot of the people that she met on that day, but she seemed like a very nice person. And I've also heard from colleagues from Kansas that she is wonderful. So we are excited to welcome her. As far as December diplomas go, I've gotten a question from a couple of people about, because we will not have the same chancellor, will the December diplomas, if they've already been designed, need to be changed? We're working to get Chancellor-elect Garrett's signature, hopefully before she starts. I can't guarantee that, but if you need to use Chancellor Johnson's signature, that's fine. I know that those a lot of you, or at least some of you, probably send those out for printing. So if you need to, get those finalized and sent to your printers beforehand, if the signature that you need to use is Chancellor Johnson's, that's okay, because he will have been Chancellor during this academic term. And so I got confirmation from the State Regents Legal Counsel that that signature would be acceptable on a diploma. Your sample diplomas for this fiscal year are still due to me via email by December 1st if you're a state system institution. So if you need to go ahead and send those, you can. If you want to wait until you get Chancellor Garrett's signature, hopefully before November 8th, but certainly sometime in November, you can do that as well. I will leave it up to you. So, hopefully that takes a little bit of stress off. If you're worried about what needs to happen with your December diplomas, you can still use Chancellor Johnson's signature for those if you need to. One final update to State Regents operations. We are currently, all of our staff, working in a staggered in-office remote work schedule. We don't know how long we will be in that mode of work. We came back to the office full time at the beginning of the summer, and then COVID cases started to rise. And so our chair, and along with the chancellor, made the decision to try to keep a small number of staff members together in the office at one time as possible. So I am physically in our office on Mondays and Fridays. I'm here today. So, if you need to reach me on the phone, if you are planning on calling, Monday and Friday are the best time to reach me. Honestly, though, the best way to reach me is still through email, because chances are, if you're calling on a Monday or Friday, I'll be in one meeting or another, and I won't be able to pick up anyway. So email is still a great way to reach me, and I try to be as expedient with those responses as I can. All right, so moving on to changes to State Regents policies that have been adopted since our last meeting. You may recall that in March, from the fall of 2020 meeting, there weren't any changes to State Regents policies, but we had several that were lined up. And so if any of these slides look familiar, it's because I just took them from my last presentation of changes that were pending, that were going to be approved in April and throughout the summer, and moved them into this one. And I'll touch on those again, just so that everyone has a reminder of what changes were actually made since the last time that we were together. So first, I wanted to point out that the COVID-19 flexibility is in fact still in effect if you need it. So institutions have the flexibility to give pass-fail grades if you need to. If you need to adjust your academic calendars to take out breaks or anything like that, if cases rise, then institutions are still authorized to do any of that. I don't think that many of you have felt the need to use that guidance or that flexibility, but just as a reminder, if you do need it, it was approved by the State Regents to be in effect through the 21-22 academic year. And if you need to find that document, this is a screenshot of our website, and you'll see the COVID-19 campus resources. If you click on that, it'll take you to this page, and you'll see the academic policy guidance document where that can be located. So once again, like I said, just a reminder that that is still available for any institutions in the state system that may need it, and you're certainly not obligated to use that flexibility, but it is still available if you would like to take advantage of it at some point. If you do, there'll be a report that many of you probably were responsible for doing the monthly reporting whenever we were doing that. We switch it to a once per semester report. So if you do utilize any of the allowed flexibility, you'll be asked to submit a report at the end of the semester on basically how many students were affected, in what ways you use the flexibility, just so that we can keep track in our office of what was going on there, and possibly look at changes that we may need to make to our policy on a long-term basis if it looks like a lot of institutions were using the same type of flexibility. So to move on to actual policies that were amended since March of this year. So the first is the in-state, out-of-state status of enrolled students policy. I'm sure you all are familiar with the changes that were made by the VA or through law that were ultimately made by the the Department of Veterans Affairs for students that receive VA education benefits. So what this change did was eliminate the 3-year period in which a student must enroll to receive in-state tuition if they are utilizing VA education benefits. State Regents policy previously allowed 5 years, which was obviously 2 years more than was required by VA rules. But now there is no limit on how long a student can have been separated from service in order to be classified as in-state. So that is something that all of you have to do anyway in order to be in compliance with VA education benefits guidelines. And so we just wanted to make sure that State Regents policy was reflective of federal policy. And you can see here, these were the actual changes that were made. And our policy in this particular section mirrors almost verbatim the federal law that deals with in-state, out-of-state status for students receiving VA education benefits. It's just easier that way because it helps to reduce possible misinterpretation on our part of what the law is saying. And once you get down the road a little bit and you forget maybe where the original source was for that, it can sometimes get a little bit tricky. So our policy is almost word for word what you would find in the public law that sets forth the guidelines for residency and students receiving VA education benefits. So the next policy that was adopted is one I'm sure that you all have not thought about much at all. Those related to accreditation. So you can see here that those changes were officially made by the State Regents in May of this year and affected several different policies. You can see on this slide, this is, on the right, it's not meant to be read. It's just meant to be an illustration of how many policies were affected by these changes. And, just to show that it was a pretty comprehensive overhaul to several policies. The most important portions of the changes that were made in May was redefining accreditation and accredited as used in State Regents policies and changing how state system institutions can accept transfer credit from accredited institutions. So you can see here, this is the new definition of accreditation in the state authorization and accreditation policy 3.1. Basically, what we did was take out the national and regional designations, since those have been taken out of the federal policy that deals with which organizations are recognized as accreditors. So basically, this just mirrors what the feds have done. It also requires state system institutions to maintain accreditation through the Higher Learning Commission. I'm sure that you all have heard that some regional or formerly regional accreditors are now accepting institutions outside of their former geographic regions into candidacy. For the purposes of our state system, we thought that it was important for institutions to stay with the historic accreditor for Oklahoma, which is the Higher Learning Commission, both because we have a long-standing relationship with that organization, and also because we wanted to make sure that all of our state system institutions maintain the same institutional accreditor, because that makes it easier for the purposes of course transfer and also uniformity in self-studies and different things that we look at from a system-wide perspective. So no state system institutions will be permitted to look outside of HLC for their institutional accreditor. We also updated 3.11, the undergraduate transfer and articulation policy. It updated the definition of accreditation to remove obsolete language and to be consistent with the policy that I just referenced, institutional accreditation and state authorization policy. Deleted definitions of national, regional, and state accrediting agency, affirmed that transcripts from HLC accredited institutions will be given full value. So this is what used to be for regional accreditors. Now there are no regional accreditors. It's just HLC because that is who our institutions are accredited by. So those will be accepted at as full value. Deletes obsolete language related to regional and national accrediting agencies. And it also gives your institutions the flexibility to determine how transfer credit from non-HLC accredited institutions is accepted. It requires your institutions to publish those policies and procedures related to how transfer credit is reviewed. So, in the end, the transfer of credit and how you're accepting courses should really be a ultimately faculty-driven process. And if faculty have delegated some of that authority to administrative staff, that's up to the institution. But the subject matter experts in those areas are really the ones that are best positioned to determine how credit should be accepted from other degree granting institutions. And so hopefully at this point, I know these changes were just adopted in May, so you may not have had time to build out your full-fledged policies and procedures related to accepting transfer credit. But by the end of next spring, we'll kind of be expecting institutions to have those procedures in your catalogs or wherever you publish your institutional policy documents, just so that there's full transparency there for students to see how their credits are reviewed whenever they are admitted to your institution as transfer students. This is the actual excerpt from the admissions policy. So you can see there, this is the language that was updated, and I basically just summarized it. So I'll make sure that this PowerPoint is sent to our organizers today. And also this language is in the policy manual on the State Regents website in 3.11. The academic programs policy was updated in April of 2021. You can see here a summary of what was done within that policy. Those of you that deal with program proposals and submissions, some of this language related to different levels of degree programs may be familiar, and also added into this policy definition of prerequisite and updated the definition of reverse transfer to better clarify what that practice actually is. So you can see here what the definition of prerequisite is a non-zero level course or other requirement that a student must complete prior to enrolling in specific courses or programs. And there is an added requirement within the new program proposal request section of the policy that all required courses for a degree must be listed. So we want to really make sure that whenever institutions are creating new programs or modifying their programs, that there is a full degree of transparency about what courses the student will actually be required to take. And of course, we want to avoid those hidden prerequisites as much as possible, because we want students to know upfront how many classes they're going to be taking as part of a degree program, including those prerequisite courses that may not necessarily be within the degree. The concurrent enrollment service areas policy was updated in April 2021. So this is a new section of the concurrent enrollment policy, which basically sets forth how service areas work related to concurrent enrollment. And if a high school wants to work with a four-year institution, but the high school is closer geographically to the two-year institution, this section of the policy sets forth what the requirements for that will be, and who is responsible for the financial portion of it and what has to happen in order for that to occur. Oops. And once again, this is just an excerpt of that policy, which is now in the updated 3.10 concurrent enrollment policy, if you want to review that in more detail. The State Regents also, the very next month in May of 2021, added a new section to the concurrent enrollment policy, which deals with early college high school programs. So we have had in our state system some examples of really successful programs where students begin college coursework, and the ones that we have now in the 10th grade, and graduate high school concurrently with an associate's degree. And so we've had those for several years, and we felt like we had reached a point where we had learned enough from the successes and challenges of those specific programs to create a policy framework for institutions who wanted to develop new programs for early college. And We had, several that were asking, hey, we have a high school that wants to start their students a little bit earlier. What can we do? And instead of just having those as a case by case policy exception type model, we really wanted institutions to understand what it was that the state regents were expecting from early college high school programs. And a lot of that is to do with the target students for those programs. So, without going through the entire policy section in detail, if institutions are interested in starting an early college program, we want the main beneficiaries of those programs to be students who probably would not otherwise participate in concurrent enrollment and are maybe more or less likely to attend college and finish with a degree, because we know that getting those students into concurrent enrollment is the most cost effective and has the most return on investment, because those students who participate in concurrent enrollment are the ones who are most likely to end up finishing a college degree, much more likely than they would be if they hadn't participated in concurrent enrollment in high school. And these early college programs do represent a significant commitment of resources on the part of the institution. So we want institutions to understand that that early college is not a revenue model. Students who participate in the program still can't be charged tuition just because they start below the junior year of high school, and that they really should be designed with an equity focus in mind. And so that's what this new policy does. Again, you can see an excerpt there from the policy, which is now on the website, and this is a little bit lengthier excerpt. And once again, we're live with that now, and the state regents have approved all of those revisions. Also in May, the state regents approved revisions to the institutional admission and retention policy 3.9. So in the definitions area, they updated the number of earned hours for a student eligible for academic notice from 30 or fewer to fewer than 30 to clarify that academic notice is intended for freshman or first year students. So that is probably one that you all have been working on in your student information systems to make sure that the right students are being caught for academic notice, and the correct ones are there for either suspension or whatever other academic status they may be in. Fix the typographical error in the definition of basic academic skills. Sometimes that happens that we go through a policy and we see, oh, well, there's something that's spelled wrong there, or there's a missing punctuation, or whatever the case may be. In the section that describes what the required units of high school courses students need for admission into undergraduate programs, we added some options there for students. So previously, students were not allowed to use fine arts AP courses toward their additional unit category. We lifted that restriction. Our council on instruction felt like there was really not a compelling reason to say that AP fine arts shouldn't be okay for an additional unit. It adds high school psychology and sociology as allowable courses for the additional unit category. And it also allows students to take any liberal arts and science course through concurrent enrollment and count it within that additional units category if it's not already being used to fulfill another area. So, if a student's taking English Comp 1 and they're using it to fulfill one of their 4 required English units, then it can't be used for the additional unit category. But if they already have fulfilled all of their 4 Englishes and they took Comp 1, then they can use that for an additional unit. It eliminated language implying that only community colleges can offer AA and AS programs, because that is not the case. We do have some 4-year institutions that offer those degrees, and some vague language related to applied high school courses, which is not really a big discussion now. That was added at a time whenever applied courses were a more hot topic within education. Clarifies language regarding which regional universities are authorized to offer associate's degrees, and updated language related to academic notice to be consistent with the definition of academic notice from 30 or fewer to fewer than 30. So you can see here, that's where the academic notice definition was amended. And then this is the new language in the high school units area, and you can see it's all to do with those 2 additional units, just to give students a little bit more flexibility and hopefully some options, especially related to concurrent enrollment. You know, we want to encourage students who are qualified to take concurrent courses and not have to worry about whether or not they're still meeting their high school graduation requirements or their college admission requirements. All right, finally, the last update that has been done was the teacher education policy, which was amended in April of this year. And you can see there a summary of what was done. Probably not as many of you deal with the actual requirements of the teacher education policy, but basically what this does is corrects the number of requirements for admission into the teacher education program. It added an option for students to meet the foreign language requirement or emergent bilingual studies requirement, and it adds language that specifies criteria by which students must meet the emergent bilingual studies requirement. And if you have any specific questions about the teacher education policy, that is not my bailiwick. Dr. Goldie Thompson, the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Teacher Education and Special Programs, would be the person to contact with any questions about that. All right, so moving on to our policy changes that are currently under consideration. This is my standard disclaimer that none of these policies are approved, and that these are only ones that are somewhere in the process of being considered either by the state regents or one of their advisory councils. You all probably have heard at some point how state regents policy is made. Normally, academic policy starts with the Council on Instruction, which is made up of all of the vice presidents or chief academic officers for all of the 25 state system institutions. It normally starts in a committee of that council, where a lot of the sausage is made and most of the actual work of authoring those policy revisions happen. Then it's approved by that full council, and then it goes on to the Council of Presidents through their academic committee, and then through the full council of all the state system institution presidents. And finally, it goes to the state regents, where it's once again considered by the Academic Affairs Committee of our actual board, and then it's posted for a month with them to allow for public comment before it is ultimately adopted. So it is a lengthy process for state regents policy to get made. So, you know, some of these things, especially if they're in the early stages of consideration, it's going to be months before those changes are actually made. So just to make sure everyone knows that these are not a done deal by any means. So we do have one that is anticipated for approval this month, which is the academic program approval policy. Dr. Stephanie Beaucamp, our Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, and her team have been working really hard, along with Brad Griffith, our Director of Online Learning Initiatives, on developing a statewide program for micro-credentials. So these are smaller credentials that your institutions can offer that are meant to meet workforce needs and really be responsive to the needs of your communities. And so what needed to happen as a part of that was that our academic program approval policy needed to account for these smaller credentials and go through it and create a shorter process for them to go through, so that if you have an employer in your area that really needs students with a certain credential, you can work quickly to create that and go ahead without having to wait several months for state regents approval. And some of you may also know that the state regents just signed an agreement with Coursera to bring that learning platform to state system institutions who are not already using it. And that will also factor into micro-credentials and the way that those can be added. So that's an exciting kind of innovative thing that's going on with our policy right now. That was posted in September, and we anticipate that it will be approved at the state regents meeting this month. Less exciting one, the University Center of Southern Oklahoma. If we have any of our colleagues from Murray State College on, University Center of Southern Oklahoma is now a branch of Murray State College, known in the statute as Murray State College at Ardmore. So the state regents had an entire policy that was just devoted to UCSO. So obviously UCSO no longer legally exists, so we needed to get rid of that policy. And then you can see throughout a couple of others, there were references to that site where that needed to be deleted. So that was posted in September, and I anticipate that those revisions will also be approved in October. Finally, for October approval, another revision to the teacher education policy. This one adds language regarding coursework and training requirements for teacher education students that are set forth by statute. This happens a lot to the teacher education policy because our legislature makes laws related to how teachers need to be prepared before they are certified and can enter the classroom. And so anytime that a statutory requirement or a statutory change is made, that requires our policy to be updated to match. So we'll be, the state regents will be considering approval of one of those types of changes this month as well. The credit for prior learning policy, there will be some revisions that will be posted with the state regents this month, and there's no November meeting. So it is anticipated that as long as there's no objection by any of the board members, that this would be on their agenda for December approval. So the changes to this are really threefold. So the first is that Angel Eisenhower in our office, who works with prior learning credit for career tech experience and credentials and those types of things, has been working to update the policy related to that. One of the big changes is adding a way for military experience to be included or granted credit in the state system without going just through the ACE process. So she's had several groups of faculty members meeting to review different occupational series from the Army. So that's kind of the first branch that they're starting with. And those faculty are kind of hammering out what credit should be given for which type of experience. And I think that they've had healthcare, criminal justice, and maybe a business discipline that have been meeting to talk about how our state system institutions can accept this military credit. Once that process is finished and the faculty members decide this is what we want to give for this military experience, they will create a statewide inventory for that. And so institutions will be able to grant credit for military training and experience off of that inventory, as well as the ACE review, which will still be absolutely part of how you can grant military credit. Also, part of kind of that same vein, institutions are allowed to give credit for occupational certifications or assessments. In our policy, it was kind of implied that the student had to have been through a career tech program and have that certification or taking that assessment in order to be granted credit for that. So we're going to propose to the state regents that it's clarified that a student can come in with one of those licensures or certifications or whatever that's on the statewide inventory and be granted credit for it, even if they didn't go through a career tech program. Because if the student has the certification, that's really the most important thing, and how they got to that point is not as relevant. The second portion of this policy that is being proposed for revision is to add a section which details how state system institutions can give college credit for coursework taken at the main campus of the Oklahoma School of Science and Mathematics. So there are a couple of institutions, both public and private in Oklahoma, that have been doing this for a number of years. And so we wanted to kind of codify in policy what an institution needs to do if they want to grant credit for OSSM courses. Also want to stress that these are main campus courses. So the student has to have been at the residential school here in Oklahoma City and not at one of the branch campuses. Those branches use a different curriculum than what is used here in Oklahoma City, and they're mostly AP type courses. So the students already have an opportunity to get credit through taking an AP exam if they're at a branch campus. But here at the OSSM main campus, most of the faculty members that teach at that high school are doctorally prepared, and the students do pretty immersive, intensive experiences with OUHSC and the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation and some different areas. And so our Council on Instruction felt like those are definitely worthy courses for students to get college credit. And so we're proposing that we add that into our policy, which basically will be a faculty review process where faculty members at each institution will determine which and if they want to accept OSSM courses as prior learning credit. And if so, institutions posting that information on their website so students can see, what types of credit they would get at the various institutions if they did decide to go there with their OSSM credit. And then the final revision that will be posted in October and possibly approved in December is adding a requirement for AP policies. So the legislature this previous session passed House Bill 2750, which requires that institutions have to accept an AP score of 3. So we had in our policy a requirement that institutions accept a score of 3 and that they could ask for an exception to accept a higher score if they could demonstrate why that was necessary. And the legislature has determined that institutions don't need to be granted exceptions in that way, and that a score of 3 should be sufficient for college credit across the board. That bill also requires institutions to conduct a biennial review of their AP credit policies and have all of that information posted on their websites. So it went into effect on July 1st of this year. So I've been working with the Council on Instruction on making sure that everybody is compliant, because it also, the statute now requires the state regents to report any non-compliance to several legislative committees, and we really don't want to do that. So I've been working with your chief academic officers to make sure that you're in compliance. Some of you may have seen a Google survey that I sent out asking for the web links to your policies and when the last review of your AP credit policy occurred, and also, basically certifying that you don't require students to have above a 3 to grant credit for an AP score. So once again, this is for posting in October, that public comment period, and then hopefully approved in December. Some of these changes have been a long time coming, but we didn't want to, go in and revise the policy 3 separate times over a year. So we've held some of them until all of them were ready to move forward. The concurrent enrollment policy, this is in a very preliminary stage. This month, the Council on Instruction, Admission, Retention, and Transfer Committee will begin considering some revisions that we're proposing to them. As I mentioned earlier, the early college program that we just had approved in May, once we went in, we decided that there was actually a little bit more that needed to be said in that section to eliminate any vagueness regarding those policies. So basically, we're going to go in and talk about, reporting, and the reporting portion is probably just going to be that you have to report on your programs, and then we'll put more detailed information in the procedures handbook. And what are the metrics of success, specifying that those programs have to be approved by the state regents and which actions the state regents can take whenever those proposals are submitted. And then just cleanup of a couple of errors. For instance, it slipped by, dozens of sets of I's that we said high school degree instead of high school diploma. So I don't know how that happened, but there it is. So fixing, some small Scrivener's errors like that. Okay, so I have our Q&A here, and I've got the questions that were submitted beforehand. So I'm going to go through those, and then if we've had any questions after that, I'll stop screen sharing and be happy to answer those also. So the first pre-submitted question I got was, can concurrent students apply as test optional? If not, for institutions in a test optional pilot, will they have the ability to move to test optional admissions for concurrent students? So whenever we accepted proposals for test optional, there was a question specifically as to whether or not the institution wanted to include test optional for their concurrent students. So if you said in your proposal, yes, we want to include test optional for concurrent, then you can use that. If you specifically, because you had to say one way or the other, yes or no, if you said no, we don't want our concurrent students to be in the test optional pilot, then you would need to come back to the state regents and ask for a modification of what was approved. because all of those were approved as they were submitted. So we didn't change anything in your proposals. I compiled all of them into one, big document for the state regents to review, and they were approved in that form. So it really depends on, for your pilot program, and all of the test optional is in a pilot right now. It depends on what you put on your proposal. For the policy flexibility that we're allowing right now for the next year, if you have students that are not able to get a test score that are concurrent, then you don't have to require that, for whatever reason, if they can't get it, but you just have to report to the state regents that you admitted students without a test score at the end of the semester. So, and I would highly recommend that you have a compelling reason not to require it if you're not in one of the test optional pilots that specifically includes concurrent enrollment students. Do you need an unofficial transcript of concurrent coursework before admitting beginning freshmen? No, you don't have to have the unofficial concurrent separate from the high school transcript, as long as the college work is on the high school transcript, which it should be. And we tell high schools continuously that they need to have the college courses on the high school transcript, because what you're looking at for beginning freshman admission is just whether or not they've met the curricular requirements as high school students. You're not looking at their college coursework because they're not applying as transfer students, they're beginning freshmen. So you don't have to have the unofficial concurrent coursework transcript if it's included, which it should be, on the high school transcript. But of course, you will need the official transcript, at some point, after the student is admitted, because they will have college coursework that needs to transfer in. Can the 15 units high school core GPA be calculated using a 6 or 7 semester transcript / before all 15 units are completed? Yes, you can, because by definition, if you're not using the 6 or 7 semester transcript, then the student couldn't possibly be admitted under that third option of using the high school units for GPA. And we don't want students to have to wait until after their high school graduation to find out if they're going to be able to go to college that fall. So you can use the 15 units on a 6 or 7 semester transcript, just the same as you could use high school GPA, the overall GPA from a 6 or 7 high school semester transcript, and there's no problem with that. Is the onus of checking concurrent students' workload each semester on the college or the high school? So really, the requirement in the concurrent enrollment policy is for institutions. So it's not a policy that high schools have to follow. We don't have policies that are promulgated by the state regents that govern what high schools do. So it's a policy that institutions have to follow regarding maximum workload. That being said, it's difficult sometimes for institutions to actually calculate the workload because a student may not have their full high school schedule whenever they are enrolling for the next term at their college and university. So we really, whenever I talk to counselors, and I talk quite a bit to high school counselors, I really stress to them that they're kind of the gatekeepers on a lot of those things because the colleges have no way of knowing. But ultimately, the workload requirement in the concurrent enrollment policy is a requirement for institutions. And if a student wants to exceed workload, it's the institution that has to make that determination and not the high school. Tell us about the new chancellor. I think that I have told probably everything I know about her. As I said, she'll be starting on November 8th, and hope to get to know her a little bit better once she's in the office. How many institutions require applicants to submit all official college or university transcripts prior to admission? Is there any exception for in-progress transcripts? So I don't think that state regents policy really says one way or the other when those have to be submitted. You do need to have a complete and accurate reflection of a student's academic record to make an admissions decision. And I know that students sometimes get into a situation where all they can get is an unofficial transcript and they're working to get an official one due to a debt or whatever the case may be. It's okay to exercise flexibility in a situation like that, but in order to have a true record, you really do need to have official transcripts. So I would say it needs to be a priority. Don't let a student hang around for a year or two without submitting official transcripts. But State Regents policy is not definitive on at what point transcripts have to be submitted. You just have to be able to have a way to verify the integrity of what a student is submitting to you and make sure that what they're giving you is satisfactory for actually determining if they're admissible to your institution. Should we accept any credit from a school that is a candidate for any type of accreditation and not yet fully accredited? If a school is in candidacy, it's up to you to determine if you want to accept that credit or not. If you want to put in your institution's policy that we don't accept schools in candidacy credits, that's fine. But if they are a candidate, normally they've cleared at least some initial barriers that the accreditor requires. The vast majority of accreditors are not just going to take any school randomly for accreditation. They usually have to meet at least some minimum benchmarks to even be considered for candidacy. So that's an institutional call to determine if you want to accept that or not. This is my contact information. And once again, I'll make sure that this all comes out to you all so that you can have all of the slides. And with that, I think I've got about 4 minutes for questions.
So far, I'm not seeing anything added in the chat.
Okay. I was that comprehensive. I know it's a lot of information. I'm sorry that I have to hurry through it, but I want to make sure that I get you all a complete update. So if there's anything that anybody wants to follow up on or has any questions, as I said, always feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to answer questions.
I'm sure there are some questions. Some of us may be afraid to ask them.
I know I'm a pretty intimidating character.
You are scary like that. Anybody have any more questions you want to add in the chat, or just turn on your microphone and ask? We will have a link for everybody to participate in the survey for this presentation. Anybody else have questions while we have them in the hot seat? I think there's some interest in the website with the VA credit. I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is actually Dustin Orrell at Rose State College. I'm here with Larry. And
You're floating in and out like the Wizard of Oz.
oh, yeah. So a couple of those things on the questions that people were asking, the 15 units, the 6 or 7 semester transcript, did you say that was is that for admission?
Yes. I don't know if that's one for community colleges off the top of my head, but students can be admitted by calculating, the 15 required core units as one of the options for admissions. I know for regionals, somebody help me out. Is that a community college option as well? I don't know off the top of my head.
For regionals, yes, or it is.
Right.
Okay. And then the other thing that I think I missed is the concurrent students and the optional pilot part. I got that part of it, but did you say that currently we can use the exception that has been in place?
Through the end of this academic year, you can continue to use the flexibility where the student doesn't have access or wasn't able to take a test, because of the pandemic, or whatever compelling reason you feel like is there. You can continue to admit those concurrent students without the test scores, just as long as you're documenting that you're doing that.
Okay. We had questions on that here, so I wanted to make sure and pass it along.
Anybody else?
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I'm so sorry. Hi, just quick question. I'm calling from Oklahoma City Community College. My question is regarding asylee status. I know different schools do things differently. With asylee status, some schools offer them in-state, some offer out-of-state. I'm just wondering what the general consensus is on asylee status and how and what kind of documents do you all ask asylees to provide to prove their status?
I think that's a good question for their group rather than because we don't make the actual determinations. So I think that would be a good question for the group as to what documents do you require to prove that status?
For me, I just asked for proof of the asylee status in some way. And I know that they get really odd documents, like it comes in a little like carbonated, like a carbon half sheet. It comes in a variety of, it's very obscure, but you can also get an EAD card and they have codes on them that tell you that this person has been approved for asylum. As far as to prove the asylee status. But then for that, I've always considered it just like I would a US citizen. Do they meet the domicile requirements according to state regent policy? I don't, because that is like a indefinite status. It's not a temporary status. I would just evaluate them like you would anyone else, as long as you are sure they are approved. If they are in that waiting status, I've always treated them as out until they get approved for that status, because they may not have anything else prior to that.
Thanks, Brandy.
You're welcome, Alexa. I know you're trying to hide, but I know who you
Yeah,
are.
no, I'm here in Rhonda's office, so.
I see that there's a question in the chat about use of Duolingo scores for English language proficiency for fall 2022. As long as you are making those admissions decisions before the academic year ends, then you can still use them. So, if you have a student who is coming in for admission and the 21-22 academic year has ended, the state regents have not approved that flexibility past this academic year. So if you're admitting a student in March for fall 2022 and all they have is Duolingo, that's okay. But if they're coming in later, after that policy flexibility expires, then Duolingo is still not an approved test for English proficiency, and that is not a random decision. Anytime that we have a request to have a new test for English proficiency, we ask English like ESL faculty to review the actual assessment, and so the state regent staff are not making those decisions. Duolingo is one that has been reviewed within the last, I think, 5 years, and the ESL faculty didn't feel like it was quite up to their standards for academic English proficiency. And so that one was not recommended by that subcommittee for approval. Lest anyone think that I'm up here trying to make decisions about which English tests are good or not.
All right, we have extended Dr. Foster's time here a little bit. Does anybody else just have a burning question? Can you answer one more if we have one more? Anybody? The session survey link is posted in the chat box. Thank you so much for being here at our conference today. I know this is one of the highlights of the conference and one of the most highly attended sessions. So thank you very much for sharing the information with us and taking time out of your Friday afternoon to spend with us. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me, and have a great weekend, everybody.